All right, let me tell you about one of the weirdest cases I ever worked. To this day, I'm still not sure what actually happened out there. I've seen a lot as a detective, but this one stays with me. It's one of those cases that makes you wonder how well you actually know the world around you. So, it all started about 7 years ago. It was fall, and I was working the night shift when we got a call from this small, almost forgotten town a few hours outside the city. Their sheriff was asking for backup, said he'd stumbled onto something strange up in the woods and needed someone with experience in handling, let's just say, unusual situations. My captain put me on it. Now I'd worked a lot of cases by then, seen my share of creepy scenes, but this call was different from the start. The sheriff's voice sounded shaky, and I could hear the tension in it. He said they'd found something, and it was bad, real bad. I pulled up to the sheriff's office the next morning, bleary-eyed from the drive. The whole town had this eerie quiet to it, like everyone had just decided to stay inside that day. The sheriff, an old grizzled guy named Hank, met me out front. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "You'll want to see this for yourself," he said, handing me a coffee that was strong enough to stand a spoon up in. We got into his cruiser and drove down this narrow, winding road that eventually turned into a dirt path leading into the woods. As we drove deeper into the trees, Hank told me they'd been having strange sightings around town for the last few months. People kept claiming they'd seen a man, always described the same way. Tall, gaunt, dressed in black, with eyes that practically glowed in the dark. At first, Hank brushed it off as people scaring themselves, but then people started going missing. At least 3 cases in the past 6 months, all of them vanishing without a trace. We finally pulled up to a clearing. The scene had this heavy, almost unnatural silence to it. Hank led me to the edge, where I saw the remnants of a makeshift camp. A tent that looked like it had been shredded, some bags and clothes scattered around, and strangest of all, a circle of rocks with charred wood in the middle, like someone had tried to keep a fire going. Then Hank pointed to the tree line. There was a pile of bones, picked clean, arranged in a strange pattern. They weren't animal bones either. They were definitely human. I'm not gonna lie, I've seen some messed up things in my time, but this was unsettling. The bones were arranged in a circle with a single one placed dead center. It almost looked like a ritual. I asked Hank if he'd called for a forensic team, and he just looked at me, his face pale. "I don't want anyone else involved unless we absolutely have to," he said. "People are already spooked. And honestly, I don't know what we're dealing with here." He told me he thought it might be some kind of cult activity. I couldn't shake the feeling, though, that there was more to it. I agreed to keep it quiet for now, at least until we had more information. But I wanted to see if we could find any traces, tracks, anything that could tell us who might be behind this. So we started searching the surrounding woods. And the ground was damp and the air had that musty, earthy smell. We hadn't gone more than 20 minutes when Hank stopped dead in his tracks. I almost ran into him. He just pointed ahead, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing off in the distance, right on the edge of the trees. The guy fit the exact description people had been giving. Tall, thin, almost skeletal, with this wild mess of dark hair and eyes that seemed to glint even in the shadows. He was just watching us. It felt like he wasn't even blinking. I called out to him, told him we were the police, and asked him to come forward, but he didn't move, just stood there staring. And then, as quickly as he'd appeared, he vanished into the woods. Hank and I looked at each other, and without a word, we took off after him. We could hear footsteps ahead, crunching through leaves and snapping branches. Every time we thought we were close, he'd appear in the distance again, just staring, then vanish. At one point, we lost sight of him entirely. We stopped to catch our breath, and that's when I noticed something weird. I'd been so focused on chasing this guy that I hadn't been paying attention to where we were. The trees around us didn't look right. There was this thick mist hanging low to the ground, and I swear it hadn't been there before. Hank whispered to me, "This doesn't feel right, man. I think we should go back." But just as we turned to head back, we saw something strange etched into a tree nearby. It was this symbol, like a triangle with a line running through it. It looked freshly carved, and the moment we saw it, that same figure appeared about 10 feet away from us. His eyes locked on mine. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. It was like he was daring us to follow him, and against every bit of common sense I had, we did. He led us deeper into the woods, deeper than I'd ever been. And then we came to this clearing. In the middle of it was an old, decrepit cabin. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades, with vines crawling up the sides and windows that were nothing but empty, dark holes. Hank and I exchanged a glance, and Without saying anything, we both drew our guns and headed for the cabin. We pushed open the door, which creaked like something out of a horror movie. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the scent of mildew. The cabin was empty, or so we thought. Then we heard a sound, this soft rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere in the dark. I felt a chill run down my spine. We followed the sound to a back room where there was a large mirror propped up against the wall. But here's the weird thing. In the mirror, we saw the room as it was, only there was that man standing in the reflection right behind us, even though the room itself was empty. I turned around, gun raised, but there was nothing there, just me and Hank and the silence. But when I looked back at the mirror, he was still there, his eyes fixed on us. And then he smiled. This twisted, unnatural smile that seemed way too wide for his face. We both took a step back, and that's when the lights in the cabin went out completely. We were plunged into darkness, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat. When we finally scrambled outside, the mist was gone, and the woods seemed normal, calm even. Now, we didn't talk on the way back. I think we both knew there was no explaining what we'd seen, and neither of us really wanted to try. After that night, the disappearances stopped. The man was never seen again. Hank and I agreed not to file a report because who would believe it? I'm not even sure I believe it myself sometimes. But that symbol, the one we saw carved into the tree, I still see it sometimes in my dreams, along with that twisted smile. Every time I think about going back, something inside me stops me. It's like the woods are waiting, like he's waiting. And I'm not sure I want to find out what he's waiting for.